"Step aside, sir. You're blocking the way," Officer Brad Thompson barked, his voice echoing off the brick buildings lining Maple Street, the streetlights flickering above in the early evening mist, creating long, trembling shadows across the cracked sidewalks. Samuel Harris, a 68-year-old black man with a neatly trimmed beard dusted with silver, adjusted the strap of his worn canvas bag, his hands steady despite the sudden commotion. He had walked this route countless times to the corner pharmacy, the air carrying the faint aroma of fresh bread from the bakery 2 blocks over mixed with the damp scent of rain lingering from earlier that afternoon. His eyes, dark and calm, lifted slowly to meet the officer's gaze, the weight of his years evident in the slight curve of his shoulders and the careful rhythm of his steps. Around them, the street buzzed with the usual evening chatter, joggers passing by, the distant bark of a dog, a car door slamming in a nearby alley. Yet all these mundane sounds seemed muted under the officer's sudden demand. "I'm just heading to pick up some medication for my mother," Samuel replied, his voice low but firm, carrying the quiet authority that only comes from a lifetime of knowing one's place but refusing to be diminished. The officer stepped closer, the polished badge on his chest catching the weak light and throwing a cold gleam on Samuel's face, a subtle reminder of the invisible hierarchy in this town. Pedestrians paused, glancing at the interaction, some clutching their shopping bags a little tighter, others instinctively reaching for their phones, capturing the tension without fully understanding it. Samuel's eyes swept the street briefly, noting the small details, the flickering neon sign of the diner across the street, the damp leaves curling against the curb, the faint hum of the streetcar line a few blocks down. His lips pressed together in a measured line. He didn't step back, didn't falter. "Sir, I assure you, I mean no trouble," he added, the calm in his voice contrasting sharply with the officer's brisk movements. A sudden gust of wind swirled the fallen leaves around their feet, the dry rustle punctuating the silence. Between words, while the officer's colleagues lingered near the patrol car, shifting uneasily, their eyes darting between Samuel and Brad as though waiting for some signal or reaction. The tension in the air was almost palpable, thick enough to taste, a delicate balance of authority and restraint, the kind that holds a moment suspended like the still surface of a pond before a stone disturbs it. Samuel adjusted the worn cuff of his jacket, the fabric thin but familiar, carrying the subtle scent of home and the faint trace of his morning walk along the river. His gaze met the officer's once more, unwavering, steady as the hands of a clock ticking past the hour, and without raising his voice, he added, "I've walked these streets for decades. I know my neighbors, and I know the rules. I only wish to go about my errand in peace." The streetlights flickered again, a brief shadow crossing Samuel's face, emphasizing the calm in his demeanor, the kind of calm that is rooted not in fear but in dignity. The officer paused, his eyes narrowing, a small frown forming as he evaluated the quiet defiance before him. For a fleeting second, the usual rhythm of authority wavered, a crack in the armor of certainty. Around them, life continued, yet suspended, as if the city itself had caught its breath, waiting to see what would happen next on this misty evening street where respect and recognition were about to collide. Samuel Harris continued his slow walk down Maple Street, each step measured, the worn leather of his shoes pressing softly against the uneven sidewalk, the faint smell of rain mingling with the scent of late autumn leaves curling at the edges of the curb. He adjusted the strap of his canvas bag, feeling the slight weight of the medications and a small loaf of bread for his mother, the routine errand that marked the rhythm of his evenings. Across the street, the neon sign of the diner flickered again, painting intermittent strokes of warm yellow and cool blue onto the damp pavement, while the distant hum of traffic provided a constant, grounding backdrop to the quiet tension that lingered from his encounter with Officer Brad Thompson. The streetlights cast long shadows, stretching and bending as if the city itself were holding its breath, the hum of a nearby air conditioner punctuating the otherwise still evening. Samuel's mind wandered briefly to his past walks along this route, recalling the laughter of children leaving school, the familiar faces of neighbors who would wave in passing, and the comforting routine of a world that had always been predictable, even in its minor inconveniences. He glanced at the windows of the small shops lining the street, some reflecting the dim light, others dark and shuttered, each one a silent observer to the small dramas that played out below. A cool breeze rustled the papers in his bag, reminding him of the crispness of the air, the approaching winter hinting at snow yet to come. He paused for a moment at the crosswalk, watching a young couple hurrying past with their dog, the sound of sneakers on wet pavement mingling with the faint squeak of the dog's harness. Samuel inhaled slowly, the weight of his age and the carefulness of his movements contrasting sharply with the brisk, almost aggressive energy of the officer from earlier. He thought of his son, Marcus Harris, a man of remarkable presence and intellect, whose reputation as a judge had been quietly growing in the community, a figure known for fairness and firmness in the courtroom. Samuel's lips curved slightly at the memory, a private smile that no passerby could notice, an acknowledgement of the quiet power that ran in his family, the kind that did not need to be displayed to be felt. He continued down the street, each footstep deliberate, each glance at the surroundings meticulous, noting the subtle shifts in light and shadow as the street lamps flickered and cars passed by, their headlights creating moving patterns on the asphalt. The scent of brewing coffee from a nearby cafe wafted across the street, mingling with the faint aroma of damp leaves, grounding him in the sensory details of the neighborhood he had always known. Samuel adjusted his pace slightly, mindful of the uneven pavement, yet unhurried, his presence calm and unassuming, a stark contrast to the officer's earlier display of authority. As he approached the corner pharmacy, the automatic doors slid open with a soft whoosh, welcoming him into the warm interior, the fluorescent lights casting a steady glow over the rows of neatly arranged shelves, the faint hum of refrigeration units providing a comforting, constant backdrop. Samuel moved slowly through the aisles, selecting the items he needed with careful hands, the familiar routine offering a sense of continuity and reassurance in a world that often felt unpredictable and uncertain. He placed each item into his canvas bag, the crinkle of paper and the soft thud of bottles against fabric marking the rhythm of his movements, each sound a quiet affirmation of order and control amidst the lingering tension of the street outside. As he reached the counter, the pharmacist offered a polite nod, a silent acknowledgement of the unspoken understanding between them, and Samuel responded with a slight smile, returning the courtesy before stepping toward the door, the evening air once again brushing against his face, the distant sounds of the city resuming their constant, steady cadence, a reminder that life moved on, and he continued on his path, quietly resolute, aware of both the fragility and the resilience that defined his journey. As Samuel Harris stepped out of the pharmacy, the chill of the evening wrapped around him like a familiar coat, the damp wind carrying the faint scent of rain on asphalt and the distant hum of traffic along Maple Street. His canvas bag rested comfortably against his shoulder, filled with the small, necessary items for his mother, each carefully arranged within the folds, the subtle rustle of paper and plastic echoing softly in the quiet street. The neon diner sign across the street flickered once more, casting a shifting pattern of yellow and blue light onto the wet pavement, creating a moving mosaic that Samuel's eyes absorbed with quiet attention. Ahead, the familiar shapes of the neighborhood appeared in the dim glow of streetlights, the stoops of the brownstone houses lined with fallen leaves, their edges curling and brittle underfoot, and the faint chatter of a group of teenagers walking home from school drifted toward him, mingling with the soft creak of a distant swing in a nearby park. Samuel paused at the corner, glancing up the street, noting the way the lamplight reflected on the windows of the closed shops, each pane a muted mirror capturing fragments of the evening world. He adjusted his pace as he approached the intersection, mindful of the uneven pavement, the careful rhythm of his steps a contrast to the hurried shuffle of passers-by navigating the narrow sidewalks. The distant sound of a delivery truck reversing into an alley punctuated the steady drone of the city, the mix of mechanical hum and human movement forming a subtle soundtrack to the quiet determination etched into Samuel's posture. His mind drifted briefly to his son, Marcus Harris, the respected judge whose reputation for fairness and attention to detail had quietly spread through the courts and community alike, a presence both commanding and measured, known for his ability to see the layers of every situation with clarity and depth. Samuel's lips tightened in a subtle, private acknowledgement, a small smile that did not need to be witnessed, the kind of expression born from the pride of knowing the integrity of one's family and the values quietly passed from generation to generation. As he continued down the street, the glow of the streetlights flickered across his face, highlighting the silver threads in his beard and the calm focus in his eyes. The ordinary rhythm of his steps imbued with the weight of experience and the quiet authority of someone who has navigated a lifetime of challenges with dignity and foresight. Around him, the neighborhood carried on in its usual cadence. The distant honk of a horn, the soft bark of a dog in a fenced yard, the faint murmur of a couple walking arm in arm, all blending into the background of an evening alive with small, unnoticed details. Samuel paused momentarily outside a familiar brownstone, noting the tidy arrangement of potted plants on the stoop and the warm glow from a single window, the smell of dinner wafting faintly through a slightly open window, the city breathing quietly around him as he moved with careful deliberation toward his destination. The subtle rhythm of his walk, each footfall deliberate, carried him past familiar corners and alleys, the texture of the pavement under his shoes a tactile reminder of the neighborhood he had known for decades, each step an echo of the steady, measured life he had cultivated amidst the ebb and flow of the city around him. As he rounded the final block toward his mother's home, the soft glow of her porch light came into view, warm and inviting against the fading evening, the subtle creak of the gate welcoming him back to a place of safety and familiarity, the gentle sound of leaves rustling in the breeze blending seamlessly with the quiet pulse of the street. A symphony of ordinary life observed with the clarity and attentiveness that had become second nature to Samuel Harris over the years. Samuel Harris paused at the edge of his mother's porch, the soft glow from the lantern above casting gentle arcs of light onto the wooden steps, the faint creak of the gate behind him blending with the quiet murmur of the neighborhood settling into the evening. He adjusted the weight of his bag across his shoulder and stepped up onto the top stair, the subtle give of the wood beneath his feet a familiar reassurance. Inside, the scent of home greeted him, warm bread, the faint aroma of herbal tea, and the comforting undertone of polished wood. His mother, Eleanor Harris, stood in the kitchen doorway, a small smile breaking across her face, the lines on her weathered face softening with recognition and relief. Samuel's hands moved instinctively, placing the bag on the counter and carefully lifting out the items, the meticulous arrangement of bottles and paper a testament to decades of practiced routine. He spoke softly, his words measured. "I brought everything you need for the week, Mother. Nothing more, nothing less." Eleanor nodded, her eyes reflecting both gratitude and a quiet pride, the kind that comes from seeing a child navigate life with integrity and purpose. Outside, the street had grown quieter, the distant sounds of traffic now a soft hum, the occasional bark of a dog punctuating the gentle rhythm of the evening. Samuel took a moment to glance out the window, observing the subtle interplay of shadows cast by the streetlights on the damp sidewalks, the movement of leaves curling in the light breeze, and the reflection of the neon diner flickering softly in the glass. The neighborhood, familiar and comforting, seemed to exhale with him, a silent witness to the care and attention he devoted to the simple, essential tasks of life. He moved around the kitchen with careful deliberation, setting each item into its proper place, arranging the bread, the medicines, and the small packets of tea as though each had its own rhythm and story, a quiet choreography that spoke to a life lived with attentiveness and respect for the smallest details. Eleanor watched, her hands folded, the soft clinking of utensils from the countertop punctuating the rhythm of their shared space, a silent acknowledgement of the unspoken bond between parent and child. Samuel's gaze drifted momentarily to the window again, noting the faint glow of lights from distant apartments, the silhouettes of trees swaying lightly, the occasional flicker of headlights on the nearby avenue, each detail grounding him in the tangible world even as his mind traced the contours of the day's earlier events. The quiet of the evening wrapped around him, a comforting contrast to the tension of earlier moments, allowing space for reflection and measured thought, the weight of authority and recognition simmering beneath the surface of ordinary routines. He paused at the countertop, hands resting lightly on the smooth wood, feeling the solid presence of the home around him, the faint warmth emanating from the stove, the subtle scent of herbs lingering in the air, and the soft hum of a clock marking time steadily. Samuel's eyes met his mother's once more, a brief exchange of understanding passing between them, the comfort of family and the assurance of care grounding the lingering tension of the street outside. Every detail of the kitchen, the way the light fell across the counters, the small imperfections in the worn wood, the gentle hum of the refrigerator, seemed to speak to a life built on careful observation, patience, and quiet integrity. As he moved to prepare a simple cup of tea, the rhythmic clink of the kettle and the measured pouring of water mirrored the deliberate, mindful cadence of his life, a counterpoint to the bustling uncertainty of the world outside the warm glow of his mother's home. The soft evening light cast long shadows across the kitchen floor as Samuel Harris carefully placed the last of the items from his bag onto the counter, the faint click of glass jars and the gentle rustle of paper providing a rhythm to the otherwise quiet room. Eleanor Harris, his mother, moved to the stove, the faint hiss of the heating element and the soft aroma of simmering tea filling the space between them, a comforting contrast to the sharp tension of the street just hours earlier. Samuel paused, hands resting lightly on the edge of the countertop, his gaze lifting to the window overlooking the street, where shadows now stretched thin and long under the amber glow of the streetlights. The distant murmur of the city had returned, cars moving slowly, the occasional pedestrian passing under the flickering lamplight, yet all these sounds were softened, almost hushed, as though the neighborhood itself were acknowledging the weight of the morning's earlier events. Samuel's eyes traced the familiar contours of the room, the slightly worn wooden counter, the faint imperfections in the tiles, the small collection of family photographs lined neatly on the shelf above the sink, each frame a testament to moments preserved in quiet dignity. He reached for the tea kettle, the smooth metal cool against his palm, and poured water into the waiting mug, the soft hiss of the liquid mingling with the faint creak of the floorboards beneath his shoes. Eleanor moved quietly behind him, placing a small plate with a few slices of bread on the counter, the simple domestic act carrying a resonance of normalcy and stability that contrasted sharply with the tension of the afternoon. Samuel turned, offering a small, calm smile, his expression conveying both gratitude and an unspoken understanding of shared resilience, the kind of quiet communication that needs no words. Outside, the wind shifted gently, rustling the remaining leaves clinging to the trees along the street, the sound soft and intermittent, as if the city itself were breathing in rhythm with their calm movements. Samuel took a moment to listen, the subtle hum of distant traffic, the faint chirp of an evening bird, and the occasional creak of a neighbor's gate forming a quiet symphony that framed the ordinary yet significant acts of care and attention he was performing. He poured the tea carefully, the liquid catching the soft glow of the overhead light, and placed the mug in front of his mother, the small ritual of service anchoring the room in a sense of stability and order. Eleanor's hands reached for the mug, and as she lifted it to her lips, her eyes met Samuel's briefly, a glance rich with unspoken words, acknowledging the balance of care, respect, and calm authority that defined both of them. Samuel leaned back slightly, the tension of the earlier encounter easing further with each small, deliberate movement, his eyes flicking briefly to the window once more to take in the faint outlines of the quiet street beyond, the reflections of streetlights dancing across the pavement like tiny, transient stars. The familiar hum of the neighborhood, the gentle rhythm of domestic tasks, and the unspoken communication between mother and son created a suspended moment, a pause that held space for reflection, composure, and the quiet anticipation of what was to follow in the unfolding evening. Each sound, sight, and subtle motion formed a network of sensory cues that grounded Samuel in the immediate reality of his home, the tactile sensations of the counter beneath his hands, the warmth of the tea, the faint scent of bread and herbs, all contributing to a layered awareness of place, time, and presence. As he arranged the last items neatly and took a steadying breath, Samuel felt the continuity of his life, the interwoven sense of responsibility, vigilance, and care, marking a deliberate contrast to the tension he had experienced on the street, a reminder that patience, dignity, and attentiveness could hold their own weight in any setting, and that the quiet perseverance of ordinary acts carried the same integrity as the most visible assertions of authority. Samuel Harris stood near the window, the soft light of the porch casting a warm glow across his face as he watched the street below, now quiet, the faint reflection of streetlights dancing on the wet pavement. The city seemed to exhale after the tension of the earlier hours, the distant hum of traffic a gentle undercurrent to the otherwise still evening, punctuated only by the occasional rustle of leaves and the faint murmur of neighbors moving about in their homes. His hands rested lightly on the window sill, fingers tracing the smooth wood as he breathed in the cool night air, each inhalation grounding him in the present while his mind reflected on the delicate balance of respect, dignity, and vigilance that had marked the day. The subtle aroma of tea still lingered in the kitchen behind him, mixing with the faint scent of polished wood and the lingering warmth of bread cooling on the counter, a sensory tapestry that carried both familiarity and comfort. He watched as a cat slinked silently across the sidewalk, its movements precise and measured, mirroring the careful deliberations Samuel had learned to cultivate over decades of navigating life with patience and integrity. Across the street, the neon diner sign flickered, casting brief pulses of yellow and blue that traced over the rooftops and onto the sidewalk, reflections that seemed to echo the rhythm of his thoughts, a visual counterpoint to the quiet flow of the neighborhood. Samuel's eyes lingered on the subtle details, the way the light caught the edges of a mailbox, the curve of a lamppost, the gentle sway of branches in the evening breeze, all ordinary elements elevated by the attentive focus he brought to them, each observation a reaffirmation of the connection between self, space, and time. He shifted slightly, the soft creak of the floorboards beneath his feet a reminder of the tangible world he occupied, and in that small movement, the contrast between the calm of his home and the energy of the street earlier became evident, a juxtaposition of serenity and tension coexisting in the same temporal space. The distant hum of a bicycle passing on the avenue and the soft chirp of a bird settling for the night provided subtle auditory anchors, each sound layering into a rich, understated symphony that Samuel absorbed without haste, the practice of mindfulness interwoven with lived experience. He leaned a little closer to the glass, the coolness of the window pane pressing gently against his palms, and allowed himself to observe the reflections of streetlights and distant car headlights, the fleeting play of light and shadow creating a quiet narrative across the pavement, a story of movement, pause, and stillness. The gentle rustle of leaves in the wind and the distant, soft echo of a neighbor calling out a greeting merged into a pattern of continuity and presence, grounding Samuel in the textures of the evening, the city, and the delicate interplay of observation and reflection. As he stood silently, the weight of the day settling into his chest, Samuel felt a calm resolve, a quiet fortitude that did not need outward display, the kind of inner clarity that allowed him to navigate complexity and authority with a steady hand and unshakable patience, all while the neighborhood, now hushed under the soft glow of night, continued to breathe around him, bearing witness to the quiet strength that defined his life and presence. Samuel Harris remained by the window as the evening deepened, the sky turning a rich indigo and the first stars beginning to punctuate the vast expanse above, their distant light mirrored faintly on the wet streets below. His hands rested lightly on the sill, feeling the smooth wood and the subtle coolness that contrasted with the warmth radiating from the kitchen behind him, the scent of freshly brewed tea and the faint aroma of bread mingling in the air. He traced the reflections of streetlights on the glass, each flicker capturing tiny movements in the neighborhood, the subtle sway of tree branches, the silhouette of a cat slinking across a distant fence, and the muted glow from the diner down the block, casting shifting shadows along the sidewalk. In his mind, Samuel revisited the events of the day, the officer's abrupt command and the quiet resolve he had maintained, measuring each detail, noting the reactions of bystanders, the ebb and flow of tension, and the interplay of authority and presence. The calmness of the home contrasted sharply with the charged energy outside, yet in that contrast lay a quiet strength, a recognition that patience, dignity, and integrity were often more powerful than immediate displays of authority. He thought of his son, Marcus Harris, whose reputation as a respected judge had quietly grown through measured decisions, fairness, and attention to nuance, a presence both commanding and precise. Samuel's eyes softened slightly at the thought, the pride in his son mingling with a subtle relief, the sense that the values of careful observation, respect, and integrity he had instilled were evident in the actions of the next generation. Outside, the street remained still, occasional distant car headlights slicing through the darkness, the faint hum of traffic and distant conversations forming a gentle ambient backdrop, a quiet pulse that framed the scene. Samuel shifted slightly, fingers brushing the glass, and noted the minute details, the gentle ripple of leaves on the curb, the flicker of neon signs reflecting off damp asphalt, the soft glow emanating from apartment windows across the street, each element weaving together to form a living tableau. The quiet of the night allowed him to sense the layers of the neighborhood, the interconnections of people moving within their own routines, and the subtle indications of watchfulness and care that marked ordinary life. He let his eyes linger on the distant horizon, where the fading light of the day met the shadows of the evening, observing the interplay of color, reflection, and texture, each detail absorbed with deliberate attention. The rhythmic hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen, the faint ticking of a clock, and the subtle creak of floorboards as he adjusted his stance reinforced a sense of temporal continuity, grounding him in the present moment while allowing reflection on the cumulative weight of experience and the quiet power of moral presence. Samuel inhaled deeply, feeling the cool night air mix with the warmth of the kitchen, a balance of environments mirroring the balance he had maintained throughout the day, between action and restraint, presence and observation, authority and respect. In that suspended moment, Samuel Harris felt the convergence of ordinary life and extraordinary circumstance, a quiet acknowledgement that dignity and moral clarity could exist undisturbed amidst the currents of authority and expectation, a stillness charged with subtle awareness, holding space for what was to come without haste, tension, or visible agitation. The front door opened quietly as Samuel Harris stepped out onto the porch, the crisp night air brushing against his face with a gentle coolness, carrying the subtle scent of damp leaves and the faint aroma of baking bread from a neighbor's kitchen. He adjusted the strap of his canvas bag, feeling the familiar weight of the items for his mother, and allowed his gaze to sweep across the quiet street, the amber glow of the streetlights casting long, soft shadows along the sidewalks. The houses across the street were dark except for the occasional flicker of a television or the faint glow of a reading lamp, each window a small stage for lives carried out in their own rhythm, unobserved yet intimately felt by those passing by. Samuel's eyes caught the subtle movement of a cat slinking across a fence, the soft patting of its paws on the wood punctuated by the distant hum of a car passing down the avenue, each sound layered into a quiet symphony of evening life. He paused at the bottom step, lifting his gaze toward the top of the hill where the street curved slightly, the shadows stretching longer, the leaves rustling faintly in the wind, a reminder of the passage of time and the subtle interplay of light and dark that defined the familiar landscape. His thoughts turned briefly to his son, Marcus Harris, the respected judge whose presence in the community was known quietly but felt widely, a man whose reputation for fairness and insight had quietly shaped the lives of many. Samuel's lips curved slightly, a private acknowledgement of the continuity of values, the strength of integrity, and the quiet pride that filled a lifetime of careful attention to morality and responsibility. He took a slow, deliberate step forward, the soft thud of his shoes on the wooden steps blending with the distant sounds of the neighborhood settling into its evening rhythm, the air carrying a blend of subtle scents and ambient sounds that marked the passage from day to night. The wind shifted slightly, carrying the faint scent of rain from earlier in the day and brushing past the glowing porch light, creating subtle patterns on the steps and the pavement beyond. Samuel's hands rested momentarily on the railing, the wood smooth beneath his fingers, grounding him in the present moment as he absorbed the subtle, layered textures of his surroundings. Across the street, the neon diner sign flickered intermittently, casting moving reflections on the wet sidewalk, the light dancing across the contours of the buildings, and the occasional distant sound of a car horn or footstep adding depth to the sensory tapestry of the neighborhood. Samuel inhaled slowly, feeling the crispness of the evening air mingle with the warmth radiating from the porch light and the subtle comfort of home, the rhythm of his breathing in sync with the quiet pulse of the city around him. Each element, the shifting light, the soft rustle of leaves, the faint hum of traffic, and the steady presence of familiar buildings, formed a backdrop for the reflection of the day's events, the balance of vigilance and dignity, the quiet knowledge that patience and moral clarity could hold sway even in moments of tension. Samuel's gaze lingered on the horizon, the silhouette of distant trees and rooftops softened by the muted light of the street lamps, each shadow and glow telling a story of continuity, presence, and attentive observation. He remained still for several moments, absorbing the textures, sounds, and patterns of the night, the interplay of light and shadow, presence and absence, ordinary life and extraordinary awareness converging into a quiet, profound sense of equilibrium, a moment suspended between reflection and anticipation, integrity and recognition, strength and patience, as the neighborhood, softly illuminated and rhythmically alive, bore silent witness to the unfolding calm. Samuel Harris took his final steps down the porch, the night fully settled around him, the city quiet except for the distant hum of a late passing car and the soft flutter of leaves stirred by a gentle breeze. His canvas bag rested against his side, carrying the small items that marked the completion of his routine, and he allowed his gaze to sweep across the street one last time, noting the soft glow of the streetlights reflecting on the damp asphalt, the shadows of trees stretching across the sidewalks like silent sentinels. The houses along the block were mostly dark, windows faintly illuminated by the soft light of interior lamps, casting muted reflections and subtle glimmers across the pavement. Samuel's eyes lingered on the details that defined the familiar landscape, the curve of a wrought iron gate, the gentle slope of the sidewalks, the silhouette of a bicycle leaning against a lamppost, each element anchoring him in the quiet continuity of the neighborhood. He adjusted the strap of his bag, the weight grounding him, and inhaled the crisp night air, the faint scent of damp leaves and distant baking bread blending into the calm atmosphere. In the stillness, he felt the subtle rhythm of life continuing around him, the distant murmur of conversations behind closed doors, the occasional squeak of a dog stretching on a porch, the faint whistle of wind threading through the trees. Samuel's eyes traced the interplay of light and shadow, the neon flicker of the diner reflecting softly across the street, and the gentle glimmer of stars beginning to appear above, each point of light mirrored faintly in puddles on the sidewalks. The quiet street carried a sense of balance, of patience rewarded, as though the events of earlier hours had passed through an invisible filter of reflection, leaving the night to settle gently around those who remained observant and aware. Samuel moved slowly toward the edge of the sidewalk, pausing to take in the distant outline of his son's chambers, the subtle sense of influence and respect Marcus Harris commanded in the wider community resonating silently in Samuel's mind, a quiet echo of the integrity and fairness that defined the family across generations. His hands rested lightly on the bag, the familiar textures of worn leather and paper, reinforcing a tangible connection to the world, grounding him as the night deepened and the city softened into a muted palette of shadows and light. The wind shifted, carrying the faint scent of pine from a distant yard, mixing with the urban aromas of asphalt and damp concrete, blending into a subtle symphony of presence that wrapped around Samuel as he paused in contemplation. He observed the quiet interplay of reflective light across the street, the movement of leaves, the faint ripple of water in a small puddle near the curb, and the gentle sway of the trees lining the avenue, all forming a serene tableau that contrasted with the tension of the day's earlier moments. Each element, each subtle motion, contributed to a sense of equilibrium, a harmony between human presence and environment, and Samuel absorbed it fully, aware of the depth of observation, patience, and moral clarity that had guided him through the hours. The soft glow of the porch light followed him as he walked, casting long, fluid shadows that stretched across the sidewalk, each step deliberate, measured, and full of quiet dignity, a final affirmation of the integrity, reflection, and steadfastness that had defined his life and anchored the evening in a profound stillness. As he reached the corner where Maple Street began to fade into the subtle darkness of side streets, Samuel paused once more, taking in the textures of light, the faint movement of distant traffic, and the gentle murmur of the neighborhood, all converging into a quiet, enduring resonance that left the night suspended, full of observation, patience, and a deep, reflective presence.